Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. We apologize for the slight delay, but on behalf of the National Transit Institute, would like to welcome you and thank you for participating. The National Transit Institute develops, promotes, and delivers training and education programs for the public transit industry in the United States. Today's webinar is the National Transit Database 2022 Safety and Security Non-Rail Mode Reporting. We are very pleased to have as our presenters today Ann Singleton and James Overbeek. And Ann Eichelberg will be doing our Q&A. Ann Singleton has been a senior safety and security analyst for the NTD program since 2009, and she serves as the safety team lead. Previously, Ann was involved in several FTA initiatives and programs in a variety of support and analytical roles. And prior to Ann's work with FTA, she was a software instructor and database developer. Ann Eichelberger is also a safety and security analyst for the NTD program and also supports several other programs for FTA's Office of Transit Safety and Oversight. Prior to working for FTA, Ann was a technical assistant with a rail safety engineering firm. And James Overbeek joined the NTD team in 2015. He is a graduate of Randolph-Macon College and currently works as a validation analyst for the safety and security module of the National Transit Database. During today's presentation, you can ask a question at any time by typing it in the Q&A box. If you do not see the box, you can enable it by clicking on the Q&A box on the Zoom controls, which are most likely at the bottom of your screen. If you have not already printed out a copy of the presentation that was emailed to you, I will be pasting the link in the chat box in just a bit. At this time, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Ann Singleton. Ann.
Hi, everyone. Excuse me. Thank you, Solandra, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today and taking time out of your busy schedules to do so. The goal of today's session is to familiarize NTD reporters with the safety and security reporting requirements and the individual reporting forms. As always, we hope the knowledge that you gain today will make your job easier, and we sincerely appreciate your commitment to safety and security reporting. For those of you who also report for purchase transportation providers, noted as PT in your systems, please feel free to share this presentation with them so that they too are aware of NTD safety reporting requirements. So today we're going to show you how to access the NTD system and navigate through the various menus and forms. We're also going to discuss how setup is achieved for the SNS forms, and we're going to go through reporting on each of the 4 safety and security reporting forms, including completing a typical collision report. As you see here, the third bullet, we're also going to go through changes and clarifications for 2022. In this case, there's only one, as you'll see. So as Solandra mentioned, James and I will be presenting today, and Ann will be covering the chat box for us. Our NTD Program Manager, Thomas Coleman, is not joining us today, but Joseph Eldridge, the NTD Operations Center Manager, is joining us for at least part of today's session. The contact data that you see here will also be shown again at the end of the presentation. If you're not sure of who your safety analyst is, please feel free to contact any one of us, and we'll be glad to help you with that. All right, so first we're going to have a brief overview of the NTD system and discuss the website and navigation. In 1974, Congress established the National Transit Database Program as a means to collect information and statistics on transit systems in the United States. The first data was collected in 1979 via paper reports. Since then, the NTD has evolved into the nation's primary source of information and statistics on transit systems. The data you report to the NTD is very important and is used in a variety of ways. These include publicly available data products, which can be used for peer review, for example, industry performance reports to Congress and other federal agencies or departments, the formulation of national policy, to direct, support, or improve other FTA programs and initiatives, and used as a factor in federal funding allocations to transit agencies. How do we validate your data? Your SNS 40 forms are read by the analyst to compare the event description against the data points. In addition, all forms are periodically run through various system validation programs looking for common issues. If the analyst has questions or requests corrections, the analyst typically returns the form to the agency, but we may also call or email you. Once the corrections are made, the analyst re-reviews the forms and will approve the submission if applicable. When you make changes to a report, always be sure to resubmit the form. Failure to report required data can have severe consequences and could affect the agency's annual program funding. A failure to report can be submitted by an analyst to FTA for a variety of reasons, such as you see here. This is a screenshot of the National Transit Database homepage on the Federal Transit Administration website. On the left side are several links indicated by the red arrows that we will discuss in the coming slides. The first of these links is the About the NTD section, which contains an overview of the NTD program, contact information, and help desk contact information. The NTD data section provides access to published data products, including the Safety and Security Time Series files, current annual data and profiles, monthly ridership statistics, and the National Transit Summaries and Trends document, just to name a few. Under reference materials, you will find the NTD glossary, policy manuals, quick reference guides, and information on training and conferences, and more. Click on either the NTD reporting tool or the reporting login, you'll see both on that screen, to log in to the NTD program. Use your business email address in all lower cases to log in. Users can change the password as often as they like, but the system requires a new password every 60 days. Passwords must be at least 12 to 20 characters and comprised of at least one uppercase, one lowercase, one number, and or a special character, any 3 out of those 4. If a user ID has not been used for 60 days, the system will lock that user ID. If you get locked out, you may try to gain access by clicking on the Reset Password link located beneath where you enter your login. If you gain access but you do not see all of your usual access levels, you can try an unlock request from the actions, or answering security questions also sometimes will resolve that. If you need assistance, again, please feel free to contact your safety and security analyst. The agency's user manager establishes a person's user role in the system. The user manager is also the point of contact if you need to have your user role changed. A person must be uniquely identified in only one role. There are several access levels for NTD reporting and safety and security data reporting, as you see here for your review. Very important to contact your safety analyst whenever there's a change in the reporter. This way, we can contact the new person and ensure if they have received training and are updated on our external contact list. To log in from the NTD homepage, again, you click on the NTD reporting tool. The first screen that appears is shown here on the left-hand side. Once you click on Agree to the statement, then the screen on the right, the section on the right-hand side appears, and you enter your username and password. The first screen to appear in NTD is similar to this screenshot. However, you may have different options based on the sites you have access to. On this screen, you can bookmark by clicking on the star, the NTD. This way, once you're bookmarked, this screen will only appear if there's a system notice that you must acknowledge. Once you complete the login, This is a snapshot of the default home screen. Notice the menu options in the blue bar across the top, which we'll discuss more in the next slide. Beneath the FDA logo, you also see that you have access to the different modules in NTD, the annual module, the monthly module for monthly reporting, the safety module, and then the profile. Tasks menu shows you how many tasks you have in your queue. For example, one of the tasks you may have could be to manage any pending or incomplete SNS reports or forms. The Reports tab will take you to the reports that are available to you. First, click on the category, and in this case, you'd click on Safety. Then there are two reports that you may find helpful here, at least two. One of them is the Historical Lookup Report to view safety and security data reported in prior years. Another report is the Rate Compared to Industry Rate Report, which will compute and compare your agency's incident, injury, and fatality rates against the industry average per 10 million unlinked passenger trips. Navigating around within NTD. Under the, well, actually, let's talk about the action option one more time. Excuse me. Skip that. Under the action menu option, there aren't any actions actually related to safety data reporting, but you may see other actions here, again, depending upon your user role. The grid in the upper right-hand corner of your screen provides internal access to other sites such as FTA organizations, the user management module, the SSOR for the state safety oversight data, and so on. The silhouette or headshot is where you log out and where you can access your Appian profile and your system settings. Okay, so now we're going to talk about navigating and setup within the safety package itself. Safety and security packages automatically generate at the beginning of the new calendar year based on the agency's previous reporting status. If you were a full reporter last year, it will launch you as a full reporter this year. Modes and types of service available in the safety module are determined by the agency's P20 form. If you see any unexpected changes in the modes or type of services, or have any questions about the modes or type of service that you see, contact the person that submits the annual reporting data. If you're not sure who that is, again, you can call your safety analyst and we can look that up for you. Please do not attempt to modify the P20 yourself. If you go in and change dates in there or end dates and things like this, it can not only affect all of your safety and security data, but it can also affect your monthly ridership data that's submitted into the system as well. Safety packages give you access to all of the safety and security reporting forms, and this is a list you see here of the four forms we have in NTD, and we're going to go through each one of these forms in detail. So a little navigation first. As I mentioned, back on the Home tab, when you're on the Home tab, the Safety module is where you will click to gain access to your different packages. Now, I was going to say that right now, and this screenshot shows you that there's 3 safety packages open, but you may have noticed, if you've been in the system recently, that the 2020 calendar year closed yesterday, and so now you'll just see 21 and 22 there. So this page that we're viewing here is called, once you click on the, well, actually, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me go ahead and go to the next screen. I apologize. Okay, here we go. This is the safety summary view, or what we also refer to as the landing page. At the top of the screen, you see the reporting year, your agency ID number, and agency name. Beneath that is your safety and security analyst's name and email address, and the safety and security reporting start and end dates, which is always the current calendar year, regardless of your agency's fiscal year. Below that, you see 3 table filtering boxes. The form name filter box at the left is used to limit which forms you see in the table beneath there. For example, you could see just SNS 50 forms. The form status filter allows you to filter out forms to just see a particular status, whether it's returned or submitted, approved, or so on. And then the mode and type of service form allows you to restrict the view further by looking at just your demand response or just your fixed route service. Helps you in identifying your forms more easily. Below that, you'll see the results of those filters in the table below, and you see several columns. Each of these columns is sortable. So if you click on the column heading itself, it will sort it ascending that way. And if you want to reverse sort, you just click on it again. You can also use the browser's Control F find key to look for a particular major event report, for example. However, you must be on the correct page in order for it to even find that. And it shows 50 reports or forms at a time. Remember, from this screen, the safety landing page, you cannot actually access your NTD forms. To do that, you will actually need to, and I see I already did. This is the screen we were on. This is your landing page. When you click on NTD safety forms up here, then that takes you to the next screen, which is the dashboard that you see here. So the screen is pretty much the same as you see. You still have the same filtering boxes. The one thing, and actually I see that I'm missing from this screen, is right over here. Oops, that's why I'm going ahead. Let me back up. I'm sorry. Right over here, just above the form name filter, you would normally see a box that says File New SNS 40. And that's the link or the button that you would use to actually create an SNS 40 major event form. And I apologize that I don't have that on that screenshot. That's okay. Changes in 2022. The only change that's been made for non-rail reporting is, well, the main one is the SNS 30, and that is that we added the number of secondary security personnel field to the form. And as you'll see when we get into that, it makes it much easier to help complete the form. And we also added a separated the intersection / grade crossing selection into two separate locations now. So you'll on the I'm all mixed up today. Excuse me. I apologize. On the collision information form, we've separated it into two sections. So as you see when we get into this section, you'll no longer see both of these control devices based on what you've selected. So again, we'll get into it more detail a little bit later on. Okay, so let's take a look at the SNS 20 form. The SNS 20 CEO certification form is the CEO's confirmation of the accuracy of the safety and security data reported for the previous calendar year. The form becomes available on January 15th in the previous year's safety package. The form automatically calculates data from all submitted forms for the year. Unsubmitted data is not included in the form. The form is due by the end of February of the following year, and only a person logged in as a CEO or CEO delegate can submit the form in the system. Late notices are sent to the CEO. Again, they're automatic late notices similar to our SNS 50s, so they'll go out on the 1st and the 5th of the following month. And then if it's still late by the 15th, a third late notice will go, sent by your safety analyst. Data reporters should review their data and ensure that it matches the data in the SNS 20. Agencies should also use any in-house reports available to them to verify the data. Also, the historical lookup report on the Reports tab that we just mentioned may be helpful as it shows the incident counts by month. If the data does not match the SNS 20, check to ensure that all the safety data reports are submitted. Again, unsubmitted data is excluded. You may add or delete SNS 40s or edit SNS 50s, and the SNS 20 certification form will automatically recalculate the numbers each time the form is open. Always remember, though, to contact your safety analyst if you delete any information. Your CEO or CEO delegate will check the confirmation boxes on the form and then click on Submit. Once the form is submitted, it cannot be resubmitted, but again, the form will automatically recalculate any changes that have been made. So this is a screenshot of the SNS 20 CEO certification form. This is just some sample data up here. That's why you just see that it says test. Didn't want to show any actual agency's data. Okay, so let's take a look at the SNS 30, our security configuration form. The SNS 30 security configuration form collects the number and type of security personnel employed or contracted by your agency. The form is completed once at the beginning of the year, and you are not required to update the form during the year. All SNS 30s must be completed and submitted in order to enable reporting. If you cannot edit an SNS 50 or create an SNS 40, it's because there's one or more SNS 30s that have not been completed and submitted. All the SNS 30 forms should be completed by the end of February, even if you do not submit SNS 50 reports, such as in the case of our commuter rail and our Alaska Railway reporters. So this is a snapshot of the security configuration form. It has the typical number of security personnel box that we've had on the form for some time. We added in the new number of secondary security personnel to match with our primary and secondary columns. And then the total number of security personnel will automatically tally together the primary and secondary counts to give you the full count of personnel. All right, so we've talked about primary and secondary personnel. The primary security force is the one that routinely responds to events and or is assigned to patrol agency property or ride vehicles. The secondary security force is the one or ones that occasionally responds or responds when the primary force requires assistance. Please use a count of 0 whenever you indicate that you use local police non-contracted as your selection. The number of personnel is reported in full-time equivalent hours. So 1 FTE equals 1 person working a 40-hour week, which is equivalent to 2,080 hours per year. Prorate the number of personnel if the person works only part-time providing transit security or they provide security for more than one mode. Once the SNS 30 is completed for each mode, one SNS 30 is completed for each mode, and be careful not to double count personnel. The value in the total number of security personnel from each SNS 30 form should be equal to the total number of agency security personnel you have. For example, for your demand response, the DR mode, you have, let's say there's 0.5 personnel. For your fixed route bus, you've indicated a count of 1.5 personnel for that mode, and for your light rail, your LR mode, light rail mode, you've indicated you have 3. So that means that the total security personnel for that agency is a total of 5. If your security force covers multiple modes, you may use any reasonable method for determining FTEs. That may be modal ridership or the number of employees covering a mode. If an agency contracts for security and pays a monthly fee based on services used, they should determine the FTE based on the previous year's total hours worked. NTD allows for only one primary personnel type. If your agency has more than one type of security personnel it considers primary, report the security force with the largest number of personnel as the primary and the smaller force as the secondary. For further information, you can look at the SNS 30 guidance in our Safety and Security Policy Manual, which is available online, or of course you can ask your safety analyst for assistance. All right, so we're going to talk about the SNS 50 monthly summary report. First of all, what's a reportable event? The definition of a reportable event is a safety event occurring on the transit right-of-way or infrastructure, at a transit revenue facility, a transit maintenance facility, during a transit-related maintenance activity, or involving a transit revenue vehicle. These safety events for the SNS 50 form must meet the single injury only threshold and are related to falls, perhaps electric shock, trips and falls, hard stops for a transit vehicle, and so forth. And we'll give you several examples in a few moments. If the safety event results in multiple injuries, the event is bumped up to a major report. The SNS 50 form also collects the number of non-major fires where there was no evacuation, no injury or fatality, or property damage, but the fire still required suppression. Again, as a note, our commuter rail modes, certain hybrid rail modes, and our Alaskan railroad modes do not report SNS 50 forms. There are some exclusions to non-major events, which are events occurring at bus stops or shelters that are not on transit-owned property, unless it involves a person boarding or alighting at the time. We also do not collect OSHA events occurring in administrative buildings. Transport of an individual, solely for mental health evaluation, unrelated to a specific event, are excluded. Due to a person stating that they would like to harm themselves when there is no evidence of an injury, those transported solely for intoxication or drug overdose, and finally, injuries from collisions, even what you may consider a minor collision, or any other reportable major event type. On the form, you would enter in the number of occurrences and the matching number of injured parties for the month. Remember that injured means that the person is transported away from the scene for medical attention, regardless of whether they appear injured or not. Do not include people that were not transported away from the scene. Here's a few examples of reportable injuries. A passenger thrown out of their seat during a bus maneuver, improper wheelchair securement, so the wheelchair is sliding around, a transit vehicle closing on an arm or a leg or a backpack, or a person making contact with a stopped transit vehicle. So this is a screenshot of the SNS 50 monthly summary form. Two of the terms we mentioned related to securement issues. So securement issues are those related to an injury resulting from improper securement of a mobility device such as a wheelchair or scooter. So these obviously would get reported under other in-vehicle securement issue. The other category is for other in-vehicle, not a securement issue. These are trips and slips while on the vehicle, they trip over a stroller or an umbrella, or they're thrown from their seat, again, as mentioned, during a vehicle maneuver, and they're transported for medical attention. So complete and submit one form for each mode and type of service monthly. These forms generate automatically at the beginning of each month. If no qualifying events occurred for the month and that mode, open the appropriate SNS 50 form and choose the checkbox adjacent to No Data to Report. Then save and submit. The SNS 50 is completed regardless of the presence of a major event. The NTD system sends automated late notices on the 1st and the 5th of the month if your data has not been submitted. Please note that a report that's been saved but not submitted is still considered late. If you get a late notice, please check to ensure that all reports have a submit date. If the form is still not submitted by the 15th of the month, a third late notice is sent by the analyst. If there's any extenuating circumstances why you cannot report, please advise a safety analyst. Remember, do not include injuries from collisions or security events or other major types on the SNS 50 forms. Editing. Your SNS 30s and your SNS 50 forms can be edited at any time. Some reporters like to enter events as they occur during the month, And for these reporters, they can go in and modify the form, add the new injury or event that happened that day, and then save it. But then when the month is over and the report is due before it's due, you want to go ahead and click on Submit. Validation Analyst reviews each report for accuracy. If you have any questions, we may return the report to you, again, call you, or perhaps email you. If the return feature is used, the user login listed under the last modified user column is the person that's going to receive the email. Editing SNS 40 forms will be reviewed once we finish talking about SNS 40s. Okay, with that, I'm going to let James talk for a while, and I'll be talking to you a little bit later on. James?
Thank you, Anne. As she mentioned, we will now take a look at major event reporting. A reportable event is a safety or security event occurring on transit right-of-way or infrastructure, at a transit revenue facility, at a maintenance facility or yard, during a transit-related maintenance activity, or involving a transit revenue vehicle and meets a reporting threshold. SNS 40 reports are due no later than 30 days from the date of the event. Please make every effort to report in a timely manner. There are some exclusions to the applicability of the threshold, such as events that occur off transit property where persons, vehicles, or objects come to rest on transit property after the event, OSHA events in administrative buildings, death from illness, drug overdose, or natural causes, including those found deceased, other events such as assault, robberies, non-transit vehicle collisions occurring at bus stops or shelters not on transit-owned property, unless it involves a person boarding or alighting or involving a transit revenue vehicle, a non-revenue service vehicle, supervisor, or police vehicle collisions that occur while traveling to and from a transit-related maintenance activity or operating on public roads. Here are the thresholds. Fatality includes suicides confirmed within 30 days. One or more persons immediately transported for medical attention, which is an injury. Property damage equal to or exceeding $25,000. Evacuation of a transit facility or vehicle for life safety reasons. And a collision involving a transit roadway revenue vehicle, which results in either the transit roadway vehicle or a non-transit roadway vehicle being towed away from the scene regardless of severity of damage. Here are a few examples of events that are reportable to NTD. Two people who are still standing when the transit vehicle starts moving fall and are injured. If a deadheading or out of service vehicle is involved in a collision, or there's a fire in a bus garage meeting a reporting threshold, these are reportable. Maintenance related activities are included in reporting. Here you see a few examples of maintenance related activities that are reportable. Less severe injuries to maintenance workers are captured on the SNS 50 monthly summary report, along with non-major injuries to passengers and patrons. Now we have some examples of events that are not reportable. An employee injured on a city street or other property that is not transit-owned property. A person is waiting at a bus stop and is hit by a car is not reportable since the person was not on transit-controlled property. An assault or robbery that occurs if the person is boarding or alighting at the time. You'll remember that part of the event you'll remember that part of the event definition states involving a transit revenue vehicle. However, NTD also collects non-transit collision incidents such as an accident in a transit parking lot that meets a threshold. A few examples are when a private vehicle collides with a pedestrian or vehicle requiring immediate transport for medical treatment. A private vehicle collides with transit property such as a station, resulting in total damage of $25,000 or more, or any other threshold. Fatalities. A fatality is a death confirmed within 30 days of a transit-related event. This includes transit-related suicides. Please do not include deaths resulting from illness, drug overdoses, or natural causes, including found deceased on transit property, or it is not a result of a collision or suicide. The next threshold is injuries. An injured person is a person transported immediately away from the scene for medical attention. This includes transport by ambulance, private vehicle, or any other means. There are a number of exclusions to include. A person walking away from scene for medical attention is not considered injured. Medical attention must be sought without delay after the event. Medical attention must be administered at a location other than where the event occurred, meaning that minor first aid given at the scene is not considered an injury. Here are a few more exclusions, such as when a medical attention due to illnesses should not be reported. For example, a passenger on a bus has a seizure and is transported to the hospital. Also, the exclusions regarding mental health evaluations, declarations of self-harm, intoxication, and overdoses are excluded, just as we mentioned in the SNS 50 section. Now we'll talk about the property damage threshold. Events with total actual or estimated property damage equal to or exceeding $25,000 are reportable. Property damages include transit vehicle and non-transit vehicle damage, damage to transit stations, bus stop signs, and shelters if applicable. The cost of non-transit property, private property, buildings, fences, etc., are also included, and also include the cost of clearing wreckage. NTD requires only general or ballpark estimates, and you may use a variety of methods for estimating. There's blue book values, repair amounts, or insurance estimates. You can establish standard property damage estimates for specific event types or severity of damage. Many transit agencies create a list of standardized costs, or these estimates may be done on a case-by-case basis. Estimated damage includes personal property such as laptops, cell phones, investigation costs, medical claims, or litigation. Property damage must always be reported on the SNS 40 regardless of amount, including zero damage. If there's a collision involving a transit roadway revenue vehicle, which results in either the transit revenue vehicle or non-transit vehicle being towed, the event is automatically reportable regardless of any other threshold. This is limited to roadway vehicles and therefore excludes ferry boats and trains. For example, a transit bus and a car collide. There are no injuries or fatalities, and property damage is only $1,000. But the car is towed from the scene due to disabling damage. The event becomes automatically reportable. The towaway is not based on the severity of damage. Evacuations. All evacuations for life safety reasons are reportable. Life safety means there's imminent danger to all people in that environment. This includes both directed or customer self-evacuations. Self-evacuations are where customers vacate the property without direction of the transit agency or other authority. Some examples of a life safety reasons are suspicious packages, bomb threats, a smoke event, fire, fuel fumes, noxious odors, or a person with a weapon on a transit vehicle. If a bus has a transmission problem and passengers are evacuated to the sidewalk or shoulder, the transmission problem is not a potentially unsafe situation and therefore is not reportable. Evacuations are not common for collisions. There would need to be a fuel leak or a similar life safety situation. As a reminder, to create a major event report, navigate to the home menu option. Then you'll choose the safety option and choose the appropriate calendar year and click on the folder at the left. Unlike the SNS 50 form, the SNS 40 is not automatically generated, and you only create an SNS 40 if there's a reportable event. To create the form, click on the NTD Safety Forms button located in the upper right corner to access the dashboard. To add a new report, just click on the File New SNS 40 button. As a reminder, the SNS 40 reports are due no later than 30 days after the date of the event. If you have an event to report that includes 2 or more transit modes from your agency, how do you choose which mode to report under? If the event involved your rail mode and a non-rail mode, choose rail. For example, one of your light rail vehicles and one of your buses collide, report the incident only once under the light rail mode. If the event is between 2 non-rail modes, use the predominant use rule, which is typically based on ridership. For example, if a bus and a paratransit vehicle collide, you'll most likely report the event under the bus since it has higher ridership. The first 2 screens will act as a wizard to help determine if the events meet the thresholds. Screen 1 captures the date of the event, the mode and the type of service, and the event type. Here's a snapshot of setup screen 1. Setup screen 1 event types. The first and most common is a collision, followed by fires, hazmat spills, acts of nature, and other safety events that meet a threshold. Each of these will be discussed in more detail later in the presentation. There are 2 categories of security events. They are system security events such as arson, bomb threats, suspicious packages, etc. Basically, they are events that affect the transit system. The second type is personal security events such as assault, robbery, homicide, rape, etc. that affect 1 or more persons individually. The second setup screen asks you a series of questions, some of which are based on the mode and or type of event you are reporting. This is to determine the reportability of the event and the subforms that need to be generated. This is only a list that we will cover each in more detail. First is the number of injuries and or fatalities. The total estimated property damage amount. The screen asks about the evacuation threshold question. If the event type is a collision, then you are also asked the towaway threshold question. You will also be asked if transit revenue vehicles were involved, which determines if this is a transit or non-transit collision. This is a snapshot of setup screen 2 for the non-rail mode collisions. As I mentioned, if you chose station on screen 1, then screen 2 captures if there were transit revenue vehicles involved in the event. As I mentioned, if you chose collision on screen 1, then screen 2 captures if there were transit revenue vehicles involved in the event. Select yes if this is true, which includes purchased transportation vehicles as a transit vehicle since you are reporting for this service. You would select no when the collision involves a private vehicle on transit property or a transit non-revenue vehicle collision occurs on transit property. These are typically maintenance vehicle collisions that meet a threshold. Based on the selection you have made and questions you have answered, the system will respond accordingly. If the event is reportable as a major event, the basic information screen will appear. If the event is not reportable as a major event, the system will generate a message that the event is not reportable and ask you if you want to continue. At this point, you can edit the selections on setup screen 2 in case you answered the questions incorrectly, which may have made the event seem not reportable. If the event meets the criteria for a major event, the basic information screen will appear next. The basic information screen displays the date you already selected. When entering the time, please be sure to use AM or PM designations, even if you use military or 24-hour clock format. For the approximate or actual location of the event, be sure to include the full address, including the city and the state. This helps us ensure the coordinates are correct. The geographic location, longitude, and latitude are required. You are permitted to enter numbers, a decimal point, and a negative symbol for the longitude. Please use a minimum of 4 decimal places. If you do not have the coordinates, you can use a variety of internet resources, whichever is easiest for you. We recommend using Google Maps, or one that you can use is Google Maps. Here's a snapshot of Google Maps. If you choose to use it, as you can see, there's a box to enter. You can enter the physical address or the station name or milepost, and then you can right click on that map location and it will provide the latitude and longitude here. The basic information screen also captures the event description. The description box can hold 2,000 characters. If you exceed the 2,000 character limit, a message will pop up that you exceeded the limit and you will not be able to continue to the next screen until you reduce the number of characters. The description should be concise but descriptive so the analyst can understand what occurred, how it occurred, and should include the number and type of injuries or fatalities, and if any vehicle was towed. Also, please refrain from using vehicle 1 or vehicle 2 or codes such as IV to refer to a vehicle. The analyst has to be able to determine who hit whom and how, and not all reporters refer to vehicle 1 as IV as the transit vehicle. You may have noticed the event descriptions did not include any personally identifiable information such as names, addresses, badge or driver's license numbers, and so on. However, do continue to include ages and genders. This helps us validate your reports. The basic information section now includes attempted suicide and suicide checkboxes when the event type is a collision. This is corroborated by the same checkbox on the injury or fatality form. The last piece of this information is the name and phone number of someone to contact for additional information regarding the event. You do not need to enter the name of the person if they are the person reporting the event. When you enter a phone number, enter only the numbers and no parentheses or dots. The field will self-format. The basic information screen is also the first screen that the progress bar appears on. This bar shows how many subsections you have to complete in the progress thus far. Here's a snapshot of the basic information screen, and here you can see the progress bar at the top. First, we'll review the details of reporting a collision. The collision screens will vary slightly depending on selections on setup screen 2. Typically, there are 4 screens or subforms that may appear when reporting a transit collision. The collision event information screen, the collision information screen, the transit vehicle involved information screen, and if applicable, the other vehicle involved information screen will appear. Here's a snapshot of the collision event screen for non-rail modes. So the first collision screen is the collision event information screen. For all the modes, this captures information about the number of transit vehicles involved. The answer would always be 1, unless 2 transit vehicles from your agency collide. The location of the event, such as the transit station, roadway intersection, roadway grade crossing, bus or service stop, non-revenue facility, which would be a transit bus barn, yard, or maintenance facility, Bus or service stop is appropriate location for modes such as demand response or paratransit when they pick up at a person's home. Continuing on with locations, ramps, streets, highways, and freeways are reported as roadway, not a grade crossing or intersection. Please do not select other and type in highway or freeway. Other is used for parking or private property. Grade crossings are locations where rail tracks and vehicular traffic intersect. Parking lot entrances, exits, and driveways are not reported as intersections. Use the roadway, not a grade crossing or intersection location. For the collision width selection, indicate what the transit vehicle collided with, such as another vehicle, person, animal, fixed object, and so on. A collision with a bicyclist, pedicab, a person in a wheelchair, or on an electric scooter is reported as a collision with a person. Larger scooters, such as small motorcycles, mopeds, and motorcycles, school buses or dump trucks are all reported as a collision with a motor vehicle. Use the other selection only when no other selection is appropriate. In a multiple impact collision scenario, report the collision width as the first object impacted. For example, a bus collides with a car and then the car hits a building. The collision width selection would be motor vehicle, and you would include the damages to the building and that the building was struck in the event description. The last selection is the number of other non-transit vehicles that were involved in the collision. Please note this box is not the total number of vehicles in the collision. It is only the number of non-transit vehicles involved, so please do not include the transit vehicle in this number. Let's look at a few examples of how to determine how many other motor vehicles to report. If car 1 cuts off a bus, but no contact is made, and the bus goes on to hit car 2, the number of other vehicles to report is 1 because only car 2 had contact with the bus. Another example is when car 1 hits car 2, then car 2 hits the bus. The number of other vehicles to report is 2. Again, both car 1 and car 2 had contact. NTD also collects non-transit collisions, such as an accident in a transit parking lot or with transit property. The event must meet a reportable threshold. Here are a few examples you can read through. For the number of other vehicle selection, enter the total number of non-revenue or private vehicles involved. The non-transit collision form will appear when you select the collision event type on setup screen 1 and select no to the question were transit revenue vehicles involved in this collision on setup screen 2. After the collision event information screen, the next screen to appear is the collision information screen shown here. Earlier, I mentioned that we separated the intersection/grade crossing selection into an intersection selection and a grade crossing selection. You'll notice that the form still includes the intersection/grade crossing, but you can no longer select it. It had to be kept due to the mid-year launch for historical data. The collision information screen captures information about the conditions at the scene. The collision information screen captures information about the conditions at the scene, such as the weather and lighting conditions at the time of the collision. The twilight selection is used to refer to both dawn and dusk when it is not full light or full dark out. Please be sure your lighting corroborates the AM/PM time you entered on the basic information screen. Indoors is not used to indicate street lights or lights at a station platform. The condition of the roadway is also collected, such as wet, dry, icy, and so on. Here are some considerations when reporting the roadway configuration. You would select limited access highway to report an incident on the freeway. A limited access highway has access limited in some way. For example, it may not allow pedestrians or bicycles. If you chose either roadway intersection or roadway grade crossing on the collision event information screen, the appropriate selection will default on the collision information form. Also, you may have noticed that now when the location is intersection, that only intersection control device selections appear. Or if you select the grade crossing as the location, only the grade crossing controls appear. You no longer have to select not applicable of the inappropriate list. At this point, we have completed the collision event information screen. The next screen to be presented collects information about transit vehicle involved. One screen will appear for each transit vehicle involved. The form includes an identifier count and buttons for increasing or decreasing the number of vehicles. Here's the transit vehicle involved screen. This form captures the vehicle type, information about the type and manufacturer of the revenue vehicle involved, the vehicle action at the time of the collision type is captured for all modes. This is part of the transit vehicle that was impacted, the speed at the time of the collision, and a question asking if the vehicle was towed due to disabling damage. The fleet involved section integrates with your agency's most current A30 revenue vehicle inventory form. There are separate A30 forms for each mode and type of service. With this integration, you will choose a vehicle from the list of available options. When the selection is made, the vehicle and fuel types are already part of the selection, thus eliminating making any incorrect selections. If you are operating a new manufacturer that is not on the A30, you have the option to add the vehicle into the form. However, adding a vehicle to the collision form does not update the A30 form itself. If you have questions about an A30, please contact the person at your agency who completes the form. This is a screenshot after clicking on the existing fleet button. The grid displays the available options from your A30 for the mode you're reporting, with columns representing pertinent data. Some agencies may have selections, so you can use one of the 4 filter boxes to reduce the grid to show only certain ID numbers, certain vehicle types, or vehicle manufacturers. To select a vehicle from the fleet, click on the checkbox located to the left of each option. Then click on the Add Fleet button at the bottom. Once a selection is added, the total vehicles and active fleet vehicle columns shown here will disappear, and the agency fleet ID will appear, which would be more beneficial as part of the record and for reporters for vehicle identification. If the vehicle is not listed within the existing fleet, the user may add a new vehicle by clicking on the New Fleet button. The grid will display drop-down boxes to select a vehicle type, vehicle manufacturer, and vehicle fuel type. These are lists of all possible options, unrestricted to the agency's A30. After making your selections, click on Add Fleet. This is a screenshot after clicking on the Add Fleet button. If you need to make a correction, click on the red X under the Remove column heading and start over. Let's explore some of the transit vehicle action options. When the transit vehicle is moving into or out of a scheduled service stop, report the action as either making a transit stop or leaving a transit stop accordingly, and report the transit vehicle speed to indicate the vehicle was moving. Do not choose this option if the vehicle was not moving. If you choose the stopped or parked option, be sure to report the vehicle speed as 0. The vehicle speed must be reported even if it is 0. This diagram shows most of the impact points, which are reported from the point of view of the transit vehicle. Let's look at the options in more detail. Rear-ending and rear-ended reported as a pair. I apologize. Let's see. Okay, other front impact is used when the front of the transit vehicle is impacted, but not when it would be considered head-on or rear-ending. An example would be the front corner bumper hits another vehicle or object while turning, not the bumper on the side at the front. Likewise, other rear impact is used when the transit vehicle is impacted on the rear, but not when it would be considered rear-ended. An example would be if the transit vehicle is backing up and hit a utility pole. Sideswipe is used when two vehicles are parallel to each other going in either the same or opposite directions and bump and scrape along the sides of each other. Both vehicles would be reported as sideswipe. Please note that sideswipe cannot be the action chosen when you are reporting a collision with a person. Instead, use side impact. When reporting a T-bone or broadside collision, one vehicle is reported as head-on and the other vehicle is reported as side impact. So in the diagram, vehicle number 1, the other motor vehicle would be reported as head-on, and the transit vehicle, number 2, would be reported as side impact. Multiple vehicle accidents or chain reaction accidents can be a challenge to report. Remember to consider the first impact or collision type in your analysis. In this diagram, vehicle 1 would be reported as rear-ending. It's doing the hitting, which means that vehicle 2 was rear-ended, which then caused vehicle 2 to be pushed into vehicle 3, the transit vehicle, which would also be reported as rear-ended. For the speed, enter the actual speed of the transit vehicle at the time of the collision. If the speed is unknown, you can use the posted speed for that section of the road, and if needed, adjust the speed based on traffic and/or road conditions at the time of the incident. The last selection on the form is, was this vehicle towed from the scene due to disabling damage incurred as a result of the collision? Answer yes or no accordingly. If you indicated on the collision event screen that another vehicle was towed, the other vehicle information screen will appear. This screen gathers information about non-transit vehicle or vehicles involved in the collision. If more than one other vehicle is involved, you will need to complete one other vehicle involved information form for each motor vehicle involved. Vehicle counts are included on the form, as well as options to add or remove vehicles. Here's a screenshot of the other vehicle involved screen for non-rail collision reporting. The form collects the type of other vehicle. The form includes an option for a non-revenue rail vehicle. The automobile option would be used for both cars and passenger vans, like a Dodge Caravan, for example. The action or physical movement of the other vehicle at the time of the collision is also collected. Just as when reporting the transit vehicle collision type, you are indicating the part of the vehicle that was hit from the point of view of the other vehicle. The form includes the question, Was this vehicle towed away from the scene due to disabling damage incurred as a result of the collision? Answer yes or no accordingly. Please select no if the vehicle was towed because the operator was taken away and just wanted it towed. It must be due to disabling damage, even though that may only be a flat tire. This concludes the collision information screen. If your event includes an injury or fatality, you will need to complete a screen for each person. This form also includes a person count and buttons for increasing or decreasing the number of people. Person type, location categories are divided into two groups: person outside the vehicle and person inside the vehicle. Transit vehicle rider is the correct choice for passengers boarding or alighting. Pedestrians walking along road also includes walking along rail tracks. The forms also include an attempted suicide and a trespasser checkbox on the injury form, and suicide and a trespasser checkbox on the fatality form. Please be sure to select the location and all checkboxes accordingly. Trespassers are people in unauthorized areas, typically in facilities. Just as with attempted suicide, if there are police reports, eyewitness statements, etc., to account for trespassing, please include the information in the event description. Using the word trespasser or trespassing is very helpful to the analyst. Trespassing events are not reported on the event level, and trespassing is not a threshold. Rather, we collect trespasser injuries or fatalities. This is a snapshot of the fatality form. Notice the operator can be either inside or outside a vehicle. This is a very common mistake for someone to choose the operator option from outside the vehicle during a vehicle collision. This is a snapshot of the injury form where you can see both locations, person outside vehicles and person inside vehicles include the transit vehicle operator selection. Please be sure to choose the location of where the operator was at the time of the collision. At this point, I will pass this back to Anne to finish out.
Thank you, James. And before I start the next section, I wanted to apologize to Thomas, who asked a question earlier, and then I accidentally clicked on the answer live question. So that's what I'm going to do. He says, I confused. I thought all accidents involving revenue vehicles were considered major events, thus requiring a major event report. That's true, but the collision involving the revenue vehicle has to meet a threshold in order to be reportable. So you just don't report every collision that involves a revenue vehicle. Must meet a threshold, as all events do. Okay, so James went through the collision forms. So now we're going to take a look at some of the other sub-forms and event types in NTD. So first we're going to talk about, or continue to talk about, is evacuations. Evacuations can be included in any event type, but are less common in collisions. If an evacuation is incorrectly included or excluded, you cannot add or delete it from the report. You will need to delete the entire report and start a new one, including or not including the evacuation accordingly. The evacuation subform includes a verification question to confirm the evacuation was for life safety or a potentially life safety condition. Please do not answer no to the evacuation question on this form. If evacuations are not for life safety, then you delete the report again and create a new report without the evacuation. This is a screenshot of the evacuation subform, little form. The evacuation details section is where you include a brief description of the evacuation, including the cause. The what was evacuated question is used to indicate what was actually evacuated. The choice would be in vehicle / vessel, which would mean that that occurred on the bus, for example. Do not report the location of the bus at the time of the collision, bus or ferry, let's say. And the last question asks if this was a self-evacuation. This is not a threshold, it's just a notation. A self-evacuation is reported when transit passengers get off of the transit vehicle without being asked to. Fires. Reporting fires on the SNS 40, again, must meet a major event threshold. To be defined as a fire, the incident must have required suppression equipment or personnel involved to contain the fire and must meet a reporting event threshold. Without these thresholds, the fire requiring suppression is reported on the SNS 50 non-major summary report. Arson is reported on screen 1 as a system security event, not as fire. Presence of smoke with no fire and no suppression is reported as an other safety event on the SNS 40 form, again, if it meets a threshold. This is the fire event details screen. If the fire is in or on the vehicle, including the engine, wheel area, or anywhere on the outside, this would be reported as in or on vehicle. Report the type or the cause of the fire, that's electrical or so on. For the fuel type selection, if you choose the location of the fire as in or on vehicle, then you would report the fuel type that's used to power the vehicle. Acts of God are natural and unavoidable catastrophes that affect the transit environment. Select all locations of property damage, injuries, fatalities, and evacuations. And this is the one form that you'll be able to choose multiple locations for. For example, the location should indicate the property or the properties that were damaged and not just the geographic location, such as the name of the city. This is a screenshot of the Act of God screen. Hazmat spills. When reporting hazardous material spills, the spill must meet a reportable threshold, again, and have caused imminent danger to life, health, or the environment, and required specialized cleanup. A couple of examples of what not to report as a hazmat event are small oil, brake fluid leaking from a transit vehicle. We don't consider that enough fluid to meet a threshold. A bleach container or something similar carried onto a vehicle and it breaks open and the vehicle is evacuated due to fumes, you would report this as an other safety event if no specialized cleanup is used. And this is a screenshot of the hazmat form. Okay. As James mentioned, we have two categories of security events on screen 1. System security or personal security events, which again must meet a reporting threshold. System security events occur on transit property and generally affect the transit system as a whole. Personal security events happen to individuals on transit property or those boarding or alighting a transit vehicle. This is also where you would report a suicide or attempted suicide that did not involve impact with a transit vehicle. Those suicides or attempted suicides by trying to jump in front of a transit vehicle are reported as a collision. So this is a screenshot of the system security event. You see the various types there: bomb threats, bombings, suspicious packages, arson, so on and so forth. And then the personal security screen: assault, robbery, rape, homicide, etc. And finally, one final major type, the final major event type is other safety events. This is basically your miscellaneous category. These events, again, must meet a reporting threshold of 1 or more fatalities, 2 or more injured if that's the only threshold, property damage of $25,000 or more, or an evacuation for life safety. Please note that you may report an other safety event with 1 injury, but only if there is another threshold involved. Here are some examples. As you see, evacuations due to smoke, fumes, noxious odors, any fatality on transit property that is not considered to be a collision or a suicide, as I mentioned, 2 people thrown out of their seats due to a hard brake, 3 people injured in an escalator when it comes to an abrupt stop, or other safety events resulting in a single injury. Again, other safety events with only a single injury get reported on the monthly SNS 50 summary report. And then here's a screenshot of the major other event details form. Okay. All right, so let's talk just for a few minutes about saving, submitting your report, and editing. At any point from the basic information screen on, the system automatically saves your report. So if you close the report without saving or submitting from this third screen, the basic information screen on, these get saved as pending reports, which appear on your task menu option. So maybe you were going through the report, you got to the third screen, you realized you were going to need more information that you had at hand. You could just close the report and it will save it as a pending report that you can then go back to that task and resume where you left off. Save and submit options appear when you are in the view form mode. Now, the view form mode is the mode that when you have going through your reports and you're all done, or you open an existing form and you see the full report and everything's grayed out. That's your view form mode. So at the bottom of that screen, you would see your save and submit buttons. Once you click on save, the report is saved and it's given an event number at the top of the report. The report stays open so that you can continue to review it. When you submit a report, the report will close and the report will return you back to the dashboard. Submitting the report releases the report to the validation analyst for review and comment. It also notifies the analyst that you have reported an event and resubmitted, so that then we know that anytime you have created or edited a report. Please note again that unsubmitted reports are excluded from the event, injury, and fatality counts on the SNS 20 CEO certification form. As mentioned when we talked about SNS 30s and 50s, analysts may return a report to you for questions or to make corrections. The analyst will send, when we use the return report feature, it will send the email to the last modified user that's listed on the screen when you're in your dashboard or your view form, your safety summary view. And it will also, each time the report is returned, you'll get an email for that. Once you've made the correction, again, please click on Save and Submit. The comment box that we return to you is located at the bottom of all of the forms except for the SNS 20 CEO certification form. Again, this box is used for us to ask questions or request a change because there are certain ways that we capture things. Each time the form is returned, it's time-stamped or date-stamped. You'll see both. Users may also respond to a request via the comment box. However, that you don't necessarily need to just say, I made the change. We'll see the change when you make it, but that's up to you. Some people like to kind of do it for confirmation. If we do ask you, sometimes in the comment box, we will ask you to make a correction to the event description in the report. In that case, please be sure to go back up to the event description and put the comment that we've requested there rather than putting it in the comment box. That way it becomes part of the permanent record for that event. Okay, little bit of a touch on some navigation when you're editing your reports. Um, here's the list. I mean, most of them are pretty much self-explanatory. One shortcut I do like to point out is the Jump To section button. And when you're in that view form mode, rather than just going next to get to the screen you want to get to, you can just click on the specific Jump To button that you want, and it'll take you right to that box. So it may be Jump to Transit Involved, which will take you to the transit vehicle, or Jump to Other Involved, it'll take you to the other vehicle involved, or Jump to Injuries, and it'll go to the first injury, and so on. And then, of course, you can use your next and back screens as you need to navigate around. Again, just as a reminder, unless we've specifically asked you to delete a report, if you delete a major event report, please contact your safety analyst and let them know that you deleted a report and tell them what the event number is. It really helps us identify our counts. We have to do counts of reports every week, and it helps us identify who deleted the report. Otherwise, we basically. So that's most helpful. Okay, so here is our contact information again. Let me just take any questions that I see in the chat box now. So are there any changes and clarifications on slide 20B, the extent of what's new for SNS? Yes. Yes, Bram, that's all. Those are the only changes for the non-rail modes. For rail mode, if you participate in that on Thursday, there's quite a bit more. So, Brian Clem, hello. If two non-transit vehicles are involved in a collision at an intersection and come to rest, causing damage to the bus platform or park and ride, would this be excluded? Okay. Okay, a little bit two-part. I'll answer this. Events that come to rest on transit property are excluded. This is kind of mostly geared towards rail, like embedded tracks in a street in case a person, lands on the tracks or is bumped by a car and lands on the tracks, things like that. So we probably have to take a little bit more look at what you're talking about. But generally, if vehicles are involved in a collision and they hit the bus platform and it meets a threshold, it would be reportable. Not on the SNS 50. Nothing like that. Nothing involving any type of collision, let me make that perfectly clear, is ever reported on the SNS 50. Even if you think it's a minor, and I use that in quotes, collision. A collision meeting a threshold is reported on the SNS 40. SNS 50 is slips and falls and hard brakes and things like that. Okay, Mark, there's a list, there's a threshold so I can refer to. Seems like not many of our injury reports are reportable, usually one person and not a hospital, not directly from the scene, worker spraining something and missing a day of work. Okay. All right, so on the SNS 50 form, no, we do not put thresholds on the forms. The thresholds are in your policy manual. They are on the quick reference guides, which are also available online. And we can direct you to where those are if you need assistance for locating that. It's just a one-pager that you can actually print out. A lot of people find that very helpful. But so again, in summary, for the SNS 50, the person has to be transported away from the scene. Now, obviously, sometimes a bus may get, a little bit up further when they stop or whatever the case may be, but it's generally away from the scene of the event, immediately transported. Doesn't matter how they're transported. Their mother could come and pick them up, but if they're transported from the scene, then it's a reportable injury. Doesn't have to be a hospital. It can be a clinic, something like that. Doesn't have to be by ambulance, as I mentioned. So if it's just a worker spraining their foot and they don't seek medical attention for it, then no, it would not be reportable. And of course, you can contact me or your safety analyst and we can discuss this in further detail. Does anybody have a list of values their agency use? Mr. or Ms. Chambers, if you're referring to property damage, I don't have these lists, of course, and that would not be something that we, the analysts, could share with you. That's another another agency's information. Unless you have a sister agency or something, and maybe you could ask them if they have a list of property damages. Sometimes insurance, your own insurance company that you use for a bus may have rates for private vehicles, or give you some kind of a scale that you could create. As James mentioned, a lot of agencies do use a scale, where a fender bender might be, $1,000, or, a flat tire might be $400, or whatever the case may be. And we do accept those ballpark amounts. Can you post a link to the one-page document? It is on the NTD website before you even log in. I don't have that up on my screen, but it is on. You'll see NTD reference materials on the left-hand side. When you click on that, you choose manuals. When you go to the 2022 Safety and Security Policy Manual, down on the lower left-hand side, you'll see it says Quick Reference Guides, and you can pull up the Quick Reference Guide from there. Again, if you have trouble remembering what I just said, again, please feel free to contact any of us, and we can navigate you to that page, and push comes to shove, we can also send it to you. I just say that because it'd be much easier if you can go ahead and get to the page yourself. Often when we do this and we say, "Here, contact us," then we get 95 emails sending out the Quick Reference Guide. So you'll see it right there on that screen. But again, we can give you a hand with that. Okay, anything else? Okay, so somebody put up the link for the Quick Reference Guide. Thank you. And make sure you choose between rail and non-rail. Yeah, if you choose the rail report, you'll be completely confused because the thresholds are totally different for rail. All right, folks, we're a little bit past our 3:30. Again, if you have any questions, please feel free to contact any of us after the meeting, and we'll be more than happy to give you a hand. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you, Ann. We just want to thank everyone once again for participating in today's webinar. Very special thank you to Ann Singleton and Eichelberger and James Overbeek for their very informative presentation and answering all the questions. Just a reminder, you will be receiving an invitation to fill out an evaluation for this event. NTI always appreciates your feedback. Thank you once again, and be safe, everyone. Take care.